Welcome to the Well Path podcast, where we sit down with experts and entrepreneurs across fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, and spirituality, offering you an inside peek at building a business and a life that is truly aligned. I'm your host, Brooke Robbins. Let's get into it. If you plant a seed in your garden, you don't go digging up the seed every single day to make sure that it's growing. You, at the outset, make sure that the conditions are right for it to grow. It's in the soil, it's got the water, it's got the sunlight, and then you let it do its thing and you trust in the intelligence of its biology to allow it to grow. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the fourth and final part of the self-trust series. As a quick recap, the self-trust series started with signs that you don't trust yourself and how to effectively stop self-abandoning, which creates a lack of self-trust in your life. In the second part, we talked about knowing yourself as the foundation of trusting yourself because you can't trust somebody that you don't know. We talked about identifying your core values, remembering who you are and the soul of you. In the third part, we talked about, from that point of knowing yourself, how to actually build a foundation of self-trust by acting in integrity and showing yourself that you show up for you. And we talked about tactical tips that you can use to build a sense of self-reliance in your day-to-day life. Now, in this final chapter of the self-trust series, we're going to be talking about how, as much as we can build a foundation of trust within ourselves, ultimately, true trust and the ability to really make trust falls and make big leaps of faith in life requires a strong foundation of faith. And we're going to be talking about how and why faith is the foundation of a bold and beautiful life. In the absence of faith, we are unable to let go. We will try to micromanage our own development. And in this metaphor, that, my friends, will kill the plant, right? So in order to actually live in such a way where we control what we can control, and then we give the rest up and we effectively surrender and trust that everything is going to work out the way that it's supposed to and work out ultimately for our higher good, this requires a very, very strong foundation of faith. Now, I want to preface this episode by saying that I will be using the word God primarily because that's the word that I use to refer to my higher power. I know that some people have a very adverse reaction to the word God, and there are many different reasons for that. You can use whatever language suits you, but I'm going to be referring to the concept of a higher power as God. If, by the way, you're interested in knowing a little bit more about my relationship building with God, I do have an entire episode on that called God Delivers in 3 to 5 Business Days, and I'll be referencing that throughout this episode. If you haven't given that a listen, I recommend giving it a listen maybe after this episode, if that's of interest to you. But without further ado, I guess on that note, I just want to say part of the reason why I'm closing the self-trust series with this topic of trust in a higher power is because by far the most impactful shift that I have experienced and undergone in terms of how I experience life on a day-to-day basis came from creating an actual live, present relationship with the creator. And I am somebody, and I go into this in that episode that I referenced, I'm somebody I've never been an atheist, but for most of my life, I was very agnostic, meaning in theory, I believed in God, but I did not have a relationship to God. I did not feel like I was communicating with God. I didn't know what praying really was, or it wasn't a part of my spiritual practice or my day-to-day life. And I can say that now God is a part of my life every single day. And the way that I experience the world and my life and the events in my life are all through the lens of having a relationship with a higher power. And it has really fundamentally shifted everything for me and shifted everything for good. So I'm excited to share more about it in this week's episode. I also want to preface by saying, even after the God Delivers in 3 to 5 Business Days episode, I received lots of DMs from many of you, and I recognize that the topic of faith is really challenging because it's very polarizing, especially because people tend to hyperfixate on what I consider to be the wrong thing, which is like the right thing to fixate on, in my opinion, is that one-to-one relationship with a higher power. That's really what we're going to be talking about today in a non-denominational way. People tend to fixate on the denominationality of religion and which religion is right and this, that, and the other. And I'm not saying those are not important questions, because they are, but that's not the purpose of today's episode. And we're just simply not going to be going there in today's episode. And secondly, I want to say that I understand that it can be really, really frustrating to feel like you want to believe in God, but just don't, or that you want to have a relationship with God, but you just don't. And I am just one human being. And by the way, I was in that position for a very long time before my sort of like what I consider to be the opening of the door experience, which again, I discuss in detail in that episode, God Delivers in 3 to 5 Business Days. So I know exactly what you're feeling. All I can share from my personal experience is that, I guess I'll say it this way. Sometimes we think we are seeking in earnest, when in reality, we kind of feel like we don't need anything or anyone else, and that we're capable of controlling everything the way that we want to do it. And life hasn't really taught us yet that that's just not how it works. And at least in my experience, my opening up experience was very much happening in tandem with having an experience in life that left me actually, truly, genuinely feeling at a loss, to a point where I was like, I cannot do this alone. I cannot get myself out of the situation alone. I cannot figure out what I'm supposed to do alone. And that is where I believe I actually started seeking in earnest. And that is when the door opened for me. So I want to just say, like, if you're somebody listening to this who's like kind of in that, like, you're spiritually curious, but you just like don't really have faith because you haven't had an experience that has been faith building, I want to say this episode is also for you. And yeah, I hope that this episode can either plant a seed or perhaps even just fertilize soil for that moment for you, whenever that moment may come. Without further ado, let's get into it. So, trusting in a higher power relieves us of the illusion of control. And I really want to take some time to dig into this, because the concept of surrender can be terrifying for people, because the idea of relinquishing control is really scary. And I think a lot of us resonate with, for however, for periods of time, or maybe even throughout our entire lives, like, it's a very natural human thing to want to be in control and to want to control things. And there's different sort of like variations of how extreme some of us can be about that. But you have to recognize that even when you think you're in control, you're not, right? And we kind of know that. So it's like, you can, for example, be really hyper controlling about your diet and your exercise and do all the right things, and you could still walk across the street, get hit by a bus, and die early, right? So it's like we have this illusion that we can control things, and there are like these little like micro components of things that we can control, but in the grand scheme of things, we are not in control in general. And I think that everybody, when you take a second to actually reflect on it, everybody can kind of understand that the events of our lives, the events of the world, the things that happen in general are fundamentally out of our control. And this is where I talk about often this concept that surrender is a superpower. And I really mean that, because surrendering is really hard. It's not something that everybody can actually do. And it's a superpower because when you learn to actually do that, and this is where faith is a really important ingredient, when you learn to surrender in the certainty that everything is working out for you, whether or not you're going to get what you think you want, knowing that you're going to get what you need, and surrendering fully to the idea and the concept that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. The big man upstairs has your back, and it's all working out for you one way or the other. It not only allows you to enjoy your life more, it's a much more enjoyable way to like move through life. But, and this is something that can't fully be realized intellectually, has to actually be experienced to fully sink in. When you start to live, truly live from a place of surrender and from a place of trust, things actually do just work out. And And that'll happen in a way that's like so unexpected, meaning like when you stop trying to micromanage everything and you kind of let life flow and you let life happen to you and you let life come to you, the most amazing connections, opportunities, and all of these things that you never could have planned for will inevitably arise. But again, you kind of have to experience that to believe it. So I'll share that as like a planting of the seed, recognizing that like to fully get that, you have to sort of suspend your disbelief long enough to experiment with it and then see it for yourself. If you struggle with being faithful and you struggle with this concept of surrender as a result, know that that is perfectly normal. And we are going to get into tactical ways to start building that trust muscle later on in this episode. So just bear with me. But the first concept I really wanted to hone in on here is that surrender is a superpower and certainty is also a superpower. Certainty is what kind of allows us to actually truly surrender and surrender emotionally. Because if you have certainty that everything is going to work out one way or another, no matter how long it takes to kind of like, maybe it's a more circuitous route than you envisioned, then you actually can surrender peacefully and just relax and know that everything is going to work out. Now, a secondary topic related to that is the concept of divine timing versus our own personal timelines. We are so impatient. And again, it's like human nature to want to be in control and to micromanage everything. You have to recognize that even if you wanted to, like you can't orchestrate things nearly as well as the creator can. And again, it's like when you actually start to experiment with living your life from a place of true surrender, you will see this with your own eyes, that the things that will come to you naturally are so much better than things that you could plan for and like go after in like a really aggressive way. I want to also say on this point that if you are anxious about the timing of something, that is a confession of your lack of faith. It took me a while for this to like fully sink in for me, because I could say, oh yes, I like have a relationship with God. I'm good. I've learned that like when I try to force outcomes, I might get the thing that I think that I wanted, but like it's not going to be sustainable because you can't cling in perpetuity. And if you fight and force and resist against the natural flow of life for something, you'll either have to be clinging onto it forever, or eventually you're going to get tired and let it go and it's not going to stay in your life anyway. However, it's easier to kind of conceptualize that than to like fully embody it and to live it. And I would still catch myself feeling anxious about the timing of certain things in my life. And I eventually realized that being anxious about the timing means that you're not truly living from a place of certainty, that it's on its way to you. And from a place of certainty that it's on its way and that also it's going to arrive in perfect divine timing. But you really have to recognize that God's timing really is perfect. And like we have our own made up timelines that we think are appropriate for various different things. And it's completely irrelevant. Everything in your life that you forced, everything in your life that you morphed into a different version of yourself in order to keep, that you pushed against natural resistance in order to maintain, that you forced in any way, shape, or form, it will all eventually fall away because it was never supposed to be yours in the first place. And this is where it's like, you can push to get what you want, or you can surrender and allow God to give you what you need. Either way, you're going to end up in the same place. You're basically just deciding how long you want to prolong your suffering and like that intense effort of like clinging and forcing before you actually eventually let go. Coming back to the metaphor that I shared at the very beginning of the episode, again, imagining you're planting a seed in a garden, resist the temptation to go in every day, dig it up, and see whether or not it's growing. You just have to trust that at the right moment, whenever it's ready, it's going to sprout and you're going to see the sprout above the ground. But before you have the visible evidence that the plant is sprouting, you have to trust that underneath the earth where you can't see it yet, it's already being worked out for you. And that's just like exactly how it is with whatever it is in your life. Now, on the topic of actually creating that foundation of faith, This is a tough one. It's an art, not a science, right? I can't sit here and be like, this is how to believe in God. But what I will say is building a relationship with anybody requires time and attention and intention, right? Time, attention, and intention. So I think it's a helpful starting point if you are in a position where you genuinely, maybe you're in this camp, right? Where it's like, maybe you do believe in God, but you don't really have a strong relationship with God, meaning communicating with God is not a daily part of your routine. Or maybe you're in the position where, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, you, in theory, believe in God, but don't really believe, but you want to, but you like don't know how to get there. I get it. Like I've heard this from so many people, and that's why I'm kind of honing in on it in this episode. The first thing to do is to start setting aside time, attention, and intention to actually build that relationship. And again, you can do this whether or not you're even 100% sure that God is real. I wanted to say that flat out too. You can do this whether or not you're actually certain that God is real. Either way, you can do this. I think that the most important time of day for spiritual work in general is first thing in the morning, because you haven't been bombarded yet by external stimuli and by like worldly things. You're still like in your purest form when you first wake up. In your dream state, you're completely connected to your subconscious and the divine. And so when you wake up, it's like you're in your purest form. So, and by the way, I think this is recommendable regardless of whether or not you're interested in building a spiritual relationship, but just like in general, it's going to help your quality of life and like your mental clarity. Is try, ideally for the first hour, but at least for the first 20 minutes when you first wake up, to be completely disconnected. That means you do not reach for your phone when you wake up. One of the best things I've done over the last like year is invest in a physical alarm clock. Like you can get the Hatch or you can just get a regular alarm clock, but like get something else to wake you up so that you can sleep with your phone in the other room or like all the way across the room from you. So when you first wake up, you're not even tempted to look at it, and spend at least the first 20 minutes to 1 hour disconnected from everybody and everything else, just with your own thoughts and with God. And I would recommend to treat this as sacred time. You could journal, you could meditate, you could pray. Now, what do those words mean? Okay. Because I think prayer, also similar to the word God, can just like have a lot of connotations. I'm going to break it down for you. This is what I believe from my perspective, my definitions. Meditation and prayer are two sides of the same exact coin. They look the same. They're going to both look like you sitting down somewhere, probably with your eyes closed, breathing deeply, and going inside of yourself and shutting out the external world. Meditation to me is the way in which you can download messages from a higher power. So meditation is about clearing your mental clutter, clearing your headspace, and creating a clear channel to actually receive messages. These could be messages about the collective. This could be a message very specific about something that is going on for you in your life, okay? But it's about connecting to your intuition and receiving downloads. Prayer is the other direction of the communication. Prayer is you communicating to God about whatever it is you want to communicate about. And for me, I can say that when I sit down in the morning, usually I start in meditation, I start in receiving mode, and then I move into prayer. And my prayer practice always starts with gratitude. It starts with thanking God for everything that I already have. And there's so much, there's so much there. Thanking God for everything I already have. Thanking God for things that I don't have yet, but I know I'm going to have. And this goes back into the energy of certainty. And then it's asking for guidance, clarity, etc. Okay? By the way, the only things I ever pray for, I don't pray for specific things, because I, at this point in my life, have recognized that I don't know what's best for me. So there comes a point in time in life where you realize that you don't actually know what's best for you. So I basically just pray for the things that are meant for me to come easily and the things that aren't meant for me to leave easily. And I pray for clarity in that. And it's very, very effective. And I kind of talk about this in the God Delivers in 3 to 5 Business Days episode as well. But if you genuinely, in earnest, start to ask God to A, remove things that aren't meant for you, B, make it clear if something isn't right for you, like you will see that reflected in your reality so quickly it's scary. So like my only caveat with this is like only do these kind of like removal prayers and these like clarity prayers if you're like really ready for the answer, because it'll come very quickly. But my point is spending time, again, ideally first thing in the morning, but actually investing in the relationship that you want to build with God, like you would invest in any other relationship that you want to cultivate, right? So it requires time, it requires focused attention, and it requires intentionality. So again, you can do this even if you don't feel like you already have that relationship yet. The best way to start building that relationship is to be intentional about it. And even if you feel kind of funny because you're praying and you're like, I don't even know like what I'm praying to or who I'm talking to or if anything is even out there, just do it anyway and then see what happens. Do it for 1 week and then see what happens. And by the way, if you are listening to this and you're in any of these camps and you do give this a go, I would absolutely love to hear how it goes for you. My DMs are always open. I'll add this at the end of the show notes also. But if we're not connected on Instagram at the.well.path, I love hearing from you guys. You can also comment directly on the episode in Spotify. I would love to hear from you. But give this a go this week. One way that I've heard this conceptualized, which I really like just because it makes it feel really fun, is like having a higher self meeting in the morning, or you can call it like your meeting with God. Like for me, it's like in the morning, it's like that's my meeting with God. Like 5 to 6 a.m. meeting with God. Like I literally like that's it. And like no one can contact me because like I'm in a meeting. So think of it that way. Give it a go. Let me know how it goes. Also, get curious. And again, like if you're somebody who wants to start building this relationship but doesn't feel like you have one yet, get really curious. Start reading, listening to, consuming content from like different spiritual traditions. Like any kind of content that provides a container for this kind of sacred relationship, I think is helpful and interesting. And again, in my experience, when I started to open myself up to this and I started to actually really seek in earnest and be curious, books would just like find themselves to me. Like it's really weird. Like books would just like come out of nowhere and like I would just like hear the name of this book like over and over again and then I would like see it on a bookshelf and like that kind of stuff will start happening. So again, intentionality is a big part of that. And so be intentional about it. The last thing that I want to kind of talk about on the topic of trusting in a higher power is I want to provide some practical tools because again, while everybody's journey to faith is completely different, and that actually I think is an amazing, beautiful topic in and of itself, I do think that there are things that you can proactively do when you are in a space where you feel like you want that guidance and you want that relationship, but you don't have it yet. So again, in addition to like doing these meetings with God in the morning and starting to try to intentionally create a relationship that way, kind of within that container, I would say when in doubt about something, ask God for help. And again, even if you don't really feel like you fully believe in it yet, just ask, but ask like in a really earnest way and surrender specific questions and challenges to a higher power and see what comes back. I referenced this earlier, but one really powerful prayer is the removal prayer, which is effectively if X thing, person, opportunity, situation is not right for me, remove it. And you can also ask for clarity. You can ask for a sign, you can ask for clarity on a specific situation. My only caveat with this, and I share this because like I made a TikTok on this actually, that I've seen like a trend going around about like making a password with God. And like the only thing I want to say about that is if you're going to be asking for signs, I think there's a good way and a not so good way to do this. Maybe good's the wrong word, but you'll understand when I explain. You can absolutely choose a symbol, a letter, a word, something, and like send that up to a higher power and then like wait for it to be reflected in your physical reality as a signal that this line of communication is open. And I think that's a very effective faith building tool. It's not the only way, it's not the only thing, but it can be helpful when you're kind of like building this trust muscle with God to like do that. And it's really important that you're not testing God, but it's more of like helping you. It's asking God to help you with your own faith and with your own certainty. And so I do think you can play around with that. And I think that's really fun and a playful way to like be in this kind of spiritually curious mindset. But do not attach specific meanings and significances to signs and symbols, because that is a very dangerous game to play. For example, like this is what I've seen a lot on TikTok, is like people are like, oh, like I told God to like bring me the word turmeric if like it's my husband. And then on my first date, like with this guy, he ordered like a turmeric tea. And so then like I think he's my husband. Like that kind of stuff is dangerous. And like I would say just don't just don't go there. But to just say, okay, you know what, God, like my password with you, that's just like our little inside joke, is like dolphin, and then just like go about your day, and like you see someone wearing a dolphin pin, like that's great. That's great. That's just like you playing around with God, and God kind of like sending you this little like, see, I'm here, I'm listening. I hope that makes sense. To wrap things up, I want to first and foremost thank you for everybody who has been along for this journey of the Self-Trust series over the last 4 episodes. This is the final episode of this series. The podcast will continue on across similar themes as it always does, but thank you guys for joining me on this little mini journey. I was so excited to dive into this topic. It's such an important topic to me. It's something that I feel like comes up a lot among my friends. And I think it's something that a lot of us struggle to sort of like cultivate and master in life. But having a firm foundation of trust in yourself, in a higher power, in the fact that everything is ultimately working out, and that you actually can relax and let go and surrender a lot of the time in life, and things will work out, it really does transform everything in your life. So I hope that you found the series useful. As a recap, at part 1, we talked about how to stop abandoning yourself. Part 2, we talked about starting to know yourself in a really deep way. In part 3, we talked about self-acceptance, integrity, loving, honoring yourself. And in part 4, we talked about faith as the foundation and trust in a higher power. So my invitation to you guys for this week is to try dedicating just 1 week to starting your mornings with this higher self meeting with God, however you want to interpret it, and see how things start to change in your life, and see how things might start to feel different in your life, and just pay attention to that. Share it with me if you feel inspired. I would love to hear from you guys. Trust is the foundation of a bold life, and faith is the foundation of trust. Thank you guys so much for being here. Last couple of housekeeping things. If you enjoy the podcast and you haven't already, please take a second to rate and review us. It really helps. Also, if you're on Spotify, drop a comment on Spotify. I would love to hear how this episode resonated with you. Follow us on Instagram at the.well.path, and TikTok, same handle, the.well.path. We are on both, as well as YouTube. And otherwise, I will see you in the next episode.